and this is a issue that is near and dear to my heart. And so I come at this issue from a perspective of a mom and a perspective of a grassroots activist within the Tea Party from the beginning. And I didn't really, education wasn't my issue per se, but it became my issue when I saw it impacting my own children. And those of you who know me or have followed any of the work that I've done, I volunteer with an organization called Women on the Wall, and you can go to womenonthewall.org and find us. I also have a blog, Voices Empower, EMPOWER.com, and you can, everything that I'm talking about you can find at those two locations. How many of you have heard of C-Scope? Okay. C-Scope came into Texas, and that's when the radar went off for me. Some of y'all might have heard of Ginger Russell, the red hot conservative. Her mother is the former teacher who uncovered C-Scope. She was tutoring kids in the afternoon, and she said, well, bring in your textbooks and let's look at what you're learning. And they said, well, we don't have a textbook. We use C-Scope. And she said, well, what's C-Scope? So she went into the school district and she said, I'm tutoring these kids and I need to see the curriculum. And they would not allow her to see it. And so she went to Barbara Cargill, who was the chairman at that time of the State Board of Education, and Barbara Cargill couldn't get access into C-Scope for 6 months. So something's kind of fishy there. They said, well, it's copyrighted and you can't see it. Well, aren't our textbooks copyrighted? So things just weren't adding up. And so Ginger, at the time we were doing the speaker showdown, Women on the Wall was down at the Capitol, and she kept pushing me, you gotta look into the C-Scope. And I said, well, I don't have time. And at that time I was looking into the Gulen schools, the charter schools. And I believe y'all have some do y'all have any of the Harmony Math and Science Centers in Amarillo? Okay, well good. That's a good thing. So I knew about, and I'll talk about it later, but I knew about the charter schools, the Harmony charter schools, but I wasn't really focused on this issue of this transformation basically in education. And so Ginger, I said, well, I don't have time to look into it. Come to the Speaker Showdown and give a presentation on it. And so she spoke, and there was the Tea Party group in Frisco invited her to come and speak, and Dr. Janine McGregor went and spoke, and that's kind of when it started getting momentum. What's interesting is at that time, Women on the Wall, we were doing conference calls. We were building communication teams across the state. And so for the last 4.5 years, we have had every Wednesday night, you're welcome to join us tomorrow night, we have had conference calls. And it has shifted to where every Wednesday night our focus is on education. And I have learned more in the last 4.5 years. I even wrote a book about it. Because it has opened my eyes into the bigger picture of what's really happening. And this is nothing new. Some of you may have heard, and especially if you've been involved in education at all, back in the 80s and 90s, the battle that Phyllis Schlafly and Kathy Adams and so many people had against outcome-based school-to-work education. How many of you know about that? A little? Okay. So that was back in the 80s and 90s, but there was a push for that back in the late 60s, early 70s as well. And And you might know about some people that were not very pro-American back in the 60s and 70s, people like Bill Ayers, Bernadine Dorn. Well, what did they do when they couldn't take down our country by violent means? They went into academia. They became the college professors that were teaching the next generation of teachers. There's a book that totally opened my eyes to a lot of this. It's called Credentialed to Destroy: How and Why Education Became a Weapon. And in that, Robin Eubanks, the author, said there were sympathizers of the Soviet Union. And they went into academia. And they had access to the next generation of teachers. And what they are doing is unilateral mental disarmament. And if you see the violence that we're seeing today, they've been successful. And basically this shift in education today that started, and it started even back before the 60s and 70s, but this is the third really big push in the United States for this in modern time. And it is a shift away from teaching children to read, write, do math, and know real history, to, which by the way, when you have an education, an academic, knowledge-based education, amazing things happen. And I don't care if you're black, white, purple, or yellow, rich or poor, if you can learn to read and write and do math, in the United States, you had an education of opportunity. You had equal opportunity. Not equal outcomes, but equal opportunity. And this shift has moved to an education of equal outcomes, and it's based on attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors. And so when you shift to an education of equity and equal outcomes, it becomes whose attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors. And we see that our children in the classroom are, they say that it's learner-centered. Well, there's a reason why there's a teacher. Teachers learned how to teach reading, writing, math, and history. And then they were the teachers in the classroom, and the child, yes, they had to sit back and listen and learn. But that's what created the exceptionalism in the United States. In this book, I tell the story of my uncle that invented the first shrimp peeling machine. It totally revolutionized the seafood packing industry back in the 50s. When he died, he had 139 patents in the United States. He invented the first conveyor belt that was in pieces, so if the belt broke, you just broke that piece. I mean, he was a brilliant guy. His inventions are what paid for my college. He employed, and still today, even after his death, his inventions employ thousands and thousands of people in the United States. Do you think that he would have been able to do that in the Soviet Union?
No.
Why, in the United States, are we implementing an education system, and it's a system, that is based on the Soviet model of education? School to work, career pathways that the state and federal government basically are sorting our children. And I'll tell you, if you go to womenonthewall.org, you can click on it, and I've charted out a timeline from the Scans report in 1991 that shifted our education federally to skills-based and behavioral, to today, where in Austin, the next generation of assessments and accountability that nobody's talking about are based on attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors. And we have a Commissioner of Education of Texas appointed by Governor Abbott, who during the next generation meeting suggested to the commission that we have in Texas standards. And you know, we have the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, that we have standards in place. And you know, if we have a standard, we've got to test it or assess to make sure the teacher is teaching it. But these standards are non-cognitive character traits, behavioral traits of our kids. Do you have a problem with that?
Yes. Yes.
Why someone who, first of all, why the Commissioner of Education, who has no background teaching children in the classroom, he's a software entrepreneur, how he got to be, he's got a bachelor's, which is great, but why is he in that position, the Commissioner of Education, to have that kind of power in the state of Texas, calling on our children to be basically psychologically profiled in their classrooms? And it's interesting because that same narrative is the same line of thinking when they were debating the Every Student Succeeds Act that passed in Washington by Congress in December of 2015. And the Ohio representative said this was the new Common Core of character traits. And here's the deal. I can appreciate, as a mom who has seen this shift now happen in Texas from C-scope to the next generation of assessments and accountability, how it is impacting my children specifically. How my older son was taught math is completely different than how my 12-year-old was being taught math. And that's kind of strange. And so, you know, I love the public education system. I grew up, I graduated from Churchill High School in San Antonio, Northeast ISD. All my family, most of us here are products of traditional public schools. And I'd say we did pretty good. So I am pro-public school. And what is being done is systematically our traditional public schools are being set up to fail intentionally. And I can state it. I can look at the legislation in Texas that conservative Republicans have passed overwhelmingly, like Senate Bill 1557 that set up the High Performance Consortium that allowed 23 large school districts to go around the Texas Education Code and implement new learning theories and teaching strategies. It was passed overwhelmingly by Republicans and Democrats. Senate Bill 6, that, how many of you know the battles that we had over textbooks in Austin? Because in Texas, we were the powerhouse. Whatever money was spent from our permanent education fund on those textbooks, we battled over what went in them, and that's what the rest of the country did. What Senate Bill 6 did is it opened up Pandora's box, because school districts no longer had to go through the State Board of Education. They could purchase instructional materials, not just textbooks, from the publishers. And those textbooks or those instructional materials only had to cover 50% of our standards.